Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, dear speakers, and then listeners, all protocol observed. I am honored to offer a presentation in our second international conference on gender equality today. And my presentation will be on the topic, the role of education and policy in advancing gender equality in STEM-D fields. I am Professor Mevi Akakovi, the Acting Vice Chancellor of Accra Technical University, and I will do this presentation together with Professor Smile JC, a former rector of the Koforidua Polytechnic and the founder and CEO of the Leadership, Entrepreneurship, and then Women and Gender Mainstreaming team. My presentation today will be done in the format of an academic paper. Now cover an introduction, problem statement and justification, methodology, results, findings and discussion, recommendation for policy, which I believe is very important for a gathering of this nature. Before I begin the introduction, I'd like to further introduce myself as a PhD in Energy Systems Engineering, and I'm currently holding the position of President of the IEC National Committee of Ghana, which spearhead, all standardization in the electrotechnical area. And I'm also a fellow professional engineer in the Institution of Engineering and Technology, and a senior member of the IEEE International. I have my address and other accolades here that we could exchange at the end of this presentation. And I thank you very much for granting me the opportunity to share a few thoughts on this topic with you today. Let's move on to the introduction. I'd like quickly to refer us to the UN Sustainable Goal 5 and 4. And Goal 5 actually talks about gender equality. It emphasizes the need to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls, specifically mentioning the elimination of discrimination and equal opportunities in leadership and education, meaning that female, just like male, deserve and have the right, to have access to full education. Similarly, the UN's SDG 4 states that focuses in actual fact on inclusive and equitable quality education, promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all. We target that highlight eliminating gender disparities in education. These are on the SDG side. On the other side, it's my pleasure to mention that Article 10 of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women stresses the importance of eliminating gender discrimination in education, ensuring equal opportunities in scholarship, access to STEM or STEM-D education, and career advancement for all. This policy document actually dictates the pace of what I'm coming to present on today. Let me add two more by talking briefly about the UNESCO policy guidelines on gender equality in STEM-D, which emphasizes closing the gender gap in STEM field by promoting inclusive education policies, addressing stereotyping, and fostering an enabling environment for girls and women in STEM education and career. Also, it will be quite interesting to remember the ILO Convention number 111 on discrimination in employment and occupation, which also advocates for eliminating discrimination in access to training and education, specifically addressing systematic barriers in male-dominated fields like STEM. So what am I trying to say so far? In recent years, let's say that the gender equality in STEM-D, that's science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and digital fields, has become an essential focus for government, educational institutions, and organizations worldwide. Everywhere we go, we hear people talking about it. But has that made a substantive change, in the tertiary ecosystem as we speak now? Let me say that whilst women's representation in this area has increased to some extent, marginally, based on the research we have conducted so far, there are substantial gender disparities persisting as evidenced below, particularly in the higher levels of academia and industry. And some of the evidence that these, substantial differences still exist are the following. Number one, the UNESCO Institute for Statistics. According to them, their report, women account for only 30% of the world researchers, with significant underrepresentation in STEM fields, particularly in leadership and decision-making roles. Again, at the World Economic Forum 2023, the Gender Gap Report highlighted that while women's participation in STEM has improved, they remain a minority in advanced roles such as professors in academia or executive level position in industry, where they represent less than 25% of senior leadership roles. Again, the Global Gender Gap Index 2022, the report again reveals that while 86% of countries have improved women participation in STEM education, only 14% show significant growth in women holding senior academic and technical positions. My brothers and sisters, this makes us think of the general problem. So far we're talking about gender equality. Are women represented in STEM and STEM-D education? No. The evidences from the report shows that a lot of effort needs to be done again. And that is why I took the pleasure to design this picture that I share with you from the artificial intelligence tool to look at women underrepresentations, in STEM fields. If you look at the picture, you see a lot of things like, in science, microscope working, and then also in technology-based areas, engineering and co, where women are on gender representation. In STEM-D field, from primary education to higher academia. It's very important because more than often institutions seem to have some policy which definitely we can say are not working. Number two is to assess the influence of policy initiatives on gender inclusivity within STEM-D discipline at national and institutional level. Number three, we should identify barriers, be it cultural, educational, and systematic, that prevent gender equality in STEM-D and recommend effective practices for addressing them. And number four, the paper seeks to propose evidence-based strategies for education and policy reforms that support and encourage women's participation in advancement in STEM-D field. As a matter of methodology, we use a survey-based research design approach. So we employ both the quantitative and the qualitative research approach. So it's the mixed method. And we've collected data using structured questionnaires and mini group interview. So we interview a few people to gather some views, and we're able to deduct some intelligence out of that. I'm sorry, I think I was on this slide rather. So results, in order not to bother you too much with the academic caliber of how this is done, but well documented in papers, these were the findings we had. Number one, let's talk about awareness of gender equality initiatives in educational institutions or workplaces, such as initiatives such as mentorship programs for women, initiatives such as scholarship for women to engage into STEM-D education, grant and support for women in STEM-D education, curriculum redesign, to make it suitable for women, education, or collaboration with industry for hands-on experience, networking, and career advancement opportunities for women. How aware are we in our institutions and those we visited, about this issue? I must say that we had a sample size of about 83 respondents, and from various institutions of the mainly focused in the tertiary space. We have wanted to collect from the primary up to the top, but due to limitation of time, we focus mainly in the tertiary space. So we have 83 respondents, and based on this, the statistics shows that majority somewhat are aware. So it's not too confident. A few, 21.7%, say that they are not aware of any of these initiatives in their various institutions, though some of these initiatives existed, they are not aware. A few minority are accounting for about 2%, are completely not aware, while we have 17% very confident that they are aware of this policy. In the nutshell, this tells us that there is a gap to fill in terms of information and raising awareness about the policies that each institution has implemented with regard to gender parity or equality at their various homes. Another aspect of the result dealt with the perception of gender equality practices in STEM D. Perception is very important, and so we rated different parameters looking at their mean value rated over 5. And the first one was to look at whether your institutions or workplace promote gender equality in STEM D. An average result below 3 is interpreted not as too convincing in our case, so we have a result lower than 3 with a very high standard deviation. However, when you look at the second parameter, which dealt with educational program in STEM D, addresses the need of both male and female students effectively. This is a view we want to collect from our own students in the tertiary eco space, and that has an average that exceeded the threshold of 3, demonstrating that yes, students believe that the educational program offered in actual fact meets both the requirement of males and females. And the third point was to look at whether there is equal encouragement and support for all genders, to pursue STEM D education. That also received a positive average above the threshold of 3, demonstrating that yes, there is quite a lot of effort, encouragement, and support, to get there. Yeah, the third categories of results look at institutional support for gender inclusivity in STEM D. Institutional support. Do we have institutions that have initiative that promote or support to some extent, the gender inclusivity in STEM D? And the response shows that while we have a few 4.8% having excellent, we have a higher percentage of 48 fair, and then for good about 43.4, and for poor 3.6. So it tells that majority of the view are in the middle. They are not sure whether they can qualify the effort made by institutions to support gender inclusivity as great or not. They are not sure, they are doubtful. A few minority, however, are certain, while there is also a big portion which are completely uncertain of all initiatives that have been undertaken by their institutions so far. There are on the questions to know whether there are perceived barriers to gender equality and what can be done. Quite a number of parameters were examined, but the one that emerged as the highest was insufficient institutional support. So despite the fact that institutions have policies, the view of the students and the people interviewed is that the institutional support for gender inclusivity is low. And this was followed by a second criteria, which was looking at the lack of funding. The lack of funding was the least of the criteria, but the second criteria that followed was the lack of industry collaboration to support gender equality. Surprisingly, industry collaboration emerged as one of the pillars on which gender inclusivity can work very well. And there are a few more barriers, but I think we all need to close the gap regarding gender, the industry collaborations. Finally, the lack of funding was rated as low, and there is also a few people who agree that there was cultural biases against women in STEM D, and that could also affect the fact that we get very low numbers of female in STEM D. Again, we also examine to some extent in this study the level of optimism about gender equality in STEM D. And a vast majority, forming 47%, were neutral. They cannot promise the future of this. A few were optimistic and many were pessimistic on the fact that there is no greater expected change in the future that in STEM D you begin to get as many female as male as you used to have in some other fields. The perceptions and even the dream of a future of a better level of inclusivity is hard for a lot of people. So 47% are neutral, and a few more are very pessimistic on this fact. This actually led us to establish a number of findings and discussion, after which probably I will discuss some policy recommendation and end this paper. So let me briefly touch on 4 major findings that this study came about. Then the first one was to look at was related to gender awareness and institutional support. We can say confidently out of this study that awareness of gender initiative in educational institutions and workplaces is moderate. The awareness is moderate, with 59% of respondents somewhat aware and 16.9% very aware. So additionally, institutional support for gender inclusivity in STEM D is largely rated as fair by 48% and good by 43%, with limited respondent indicating excellent support, about 4%. So while many respondents recognize effort towards gender equality, there remains a gap in active communication and implementation of this initiative. Institutions appear to have foundational framework or policy in place, but lack impactful outreach, to ensure broader awareness and effective execution of these policies. So people are still not aware. So increasing visibility of gender equality policy and enhancing support mechanisms are very much essential to bridging this gap. The second findings is in relation to barriers to gender equality. Our findings reveal that key barriers include insufficient institutional support, lack of industry collaboration, cultural biases, and funding challenges. So 4 of them. The prominence of institutional and cultural barriers suggests that achieving gender equality in STEM D requires systemic reforms. We need to go through systemic reform. And I'm glad we are in a gathering that is looking at something of this nature. Addressing workplace and societal biases through education and collaboration with industry is critical and crucial. The relatively lower importance of funding indicates that existing financial resources might not be optimally utilized, necessitating better program design and implementation. So we need to get some grant and support programs, in this regard. On the perceptions of policies that are being used, there was another finding which says that the current gender equality policy are viewed as moderately effective. People don't see that they are really effective, because 57.8% of the respondents were in favor of that, with only 6% rating them as very effective. So although policies exist, their limited familiarity and moderate effectiveness suggest that they are not sufficiently impactful, and therefore improve stakeholder engagement, transparency in policy formulation, and measurable outcomes are needed to enhance their credibility. Regarding the fact that we need additional support for women in STEM D, the study revealed that industry partnership for women focused internship and training are perceived as the most impactful support measures. I remember some times back we were able to establish program like this in Accra Technical University, and it yielded very, very promising results. So initiative where industry comes in to support women for internship with some little stipend can really open doors for many opportunities and encourage many of the young ladies to join STEM D, field. So we want to encourage industry to be on board. Practical hands-on opportunity through industry collaboration can significantly bridge gaps by providing mentorship, skill development, and create exposure. Finally, on optimism for gender equality, respondents were cautious to be optimistic, with 26.5% of them somewhat optimistic, while 47% of the respondents were neutral about the progress in gender, equality. Again, what does this suggest to us? While optimism exists, the neutral stance of people reflect uncertainty about the effectiveness of the ongoing initiative, demonstrating tangible progress and addressing barriers holistically could foster greater confidence um, in gender equality, going forward. So briefly, these are presented to you the result and the findings of this study. The last portion will now deal with some recommendation for policy that I believe that we may discuss further in this conference. And I believe that when we are able to integrate some of these recommendations in our existing policy, it's going to make a change, in how we play the game so far. So number one, institutional initiatives. We think that based on the paper and the findings that we need to mandate comprehensive awareness campaigns to promote gender equality initiative within institutions and workplace. Yes, the policy exists. People are not aware. We need to go all the way and campaign to make them highly visible. We need to establish dedicated gender equality unit, possibly to oversee implementation and effectiveness of these policies, and that's a step forward. Number two, we are looking at industry partnership. We need to foster collaboration between educational institutions and industries to provide targeted, internship opportunities, mentorship programs, and leadership training for women in STEM D. When we do that, we're going to encourage a lot more people to join STEM D education just for the purpose of enjoying this internship, in a highly technological arena. Curriculum reforms, that's number three. We need to look into developing and integrating gender neutral content in STEM D curricula, ensuring inclusivity at all educational level. And number four, we are looking at visibility and representation. We need to highlight female role models through campaigns, guest lectures, and public recognition to inspire and motivate women in STEM D. So if there are people who have achieved prominently, they can be used as example to support others. Accountability and monitoring. We need to set measurable targets for gender inclusivity in academic and professional settings. That will go a long way to motivate a lot of people to do what is required for them. And we should be able to regularly assess the impact of gender equality policy using transparent metrics and adjust strategies based on our findings. Colleagues, I thank you very much for listening to this presentation. I'm at the stage of concluding. I have 4 or 5 points to mention in this conclusion. The paper holistically drives us to this point where we can make these few conclusions. Number one, moderate awareness and support. Awareness of gender equality initiative in STEM D is moderate, and institutional support is largely rated as fair, good, indicating room for improvement. We need to improve we need to go for the campaign as suggested in the policy recommendation at the institutional level. Number two, systemic barriers persist. There are insufficient institutional support, lack of industry collaboration, cultural biases, and these significant challenges affect the gender inclusivity problem in STEM D. We need to overcome them by going by the policies and the recommendation we made so far. There are limited effectiveness of the policy. Though the policies exist, the implementation is viewed as moderate, not really effective. And so therefore, we need to put in institutional effort to ensure proper implementation of this. There are high potential for industry partnership to offer opportunities for internships, collaborations, and things of the nature. And this actually was highly rated by the people who fill the questionnaires. And then the need for holistic reform, addressing cultural biases, enhancing visibility of female role models, reforms in curriculum, and then establishing accountability are critical and meaningful progress that can make substantial change in the arena. Finally, we need to look at cautious optimism. While there is some optimism about gender equality in STEM D demonstrating measurable outcome, it is essential to build confidence and foster greater participation. As for me, I believe that the story of gender inclusivity is not at its best level in technical university for now, but based on the policies and the effort that we are going to put together at the institutional level, it is my dream that coming, next year, in the next few years, we are going to increase, consistently and substantially the number of female in our STEM D field, be it in engineering, applied sciences and applied art, and even any other field related. I want to thank you very much for listening to this presentation, and we also invite you to visit the university website to discover some of the new programs we are offering, some of the master's programs we are offering, which are highly subscribed. And I believe that together you can join ATU and we can make a substantial progress and a change in STEM D education and gender inclusivity. Thank you very much, and may God bless you. Bye.